I've never been a sentimental person. At least that's what my ex-wife Elaine used to say. But there is something about the morning mist over the Piedmont Hills that makes me feel like a poet. 67 is not the age to discover new talents, but life is full of surprises, not all of which are pleasant. My ranch is located a half hour from town, far enough away that neighbors don't bother, but close enough that I don't feel like a hermit. 4.5 acres of land, an old but sturdy house, a six-horse stable, and a pasture going into the hills all cost me $4.5 million 10 years ago. Back then, everyone thought I was crazy to pay that much for a hole in the ground, as my son Hugo put it. Now the price has doubled. Who's crazy now, huh, Hugo? I bought this place after my divorce when I sold a controlling interest in my construction company to my son. I started the construction business from scratch 50 years ago. At first, it was a small crew of 5. We took on any job. Gradually, we grew into a corporation with 100 employees, a downtown office, and contracts worth millions. I'm not ashamed to admit that I'm proud of what I've built, and even prouder that my son has followed in my footsteps. Or at least he used to be proud. Now, sitting on the veranda with a cup of strong black coffee, I look out at the rising sun and wonder where I went wrong with Hugo. Maybe given him too much too soon? Or not praised him enough as a child? Elaine always said I demanded too much of him. But hell, how else was a boy supposed to become a man? My phone vibrates on the table. Speak of the devil, Hugo. Third call in a week, which is odd considering he usually calls once a month, if at all. Hi, son, I answer, trying to sound casual. Dash, dash, dad. Hugo's voice sounds strained. How are you? Everything okay at the ranch? I'm fine, as usual. What's wrong? You're calling more often than you did when you asked for money for the new house. Awkward laugh on the phone. Just checking up on you. Listen, Vivian and I were thinking of coming by this weekend. Maybe we could help you with something. Check the roof or fix the fence. Now I know for sure something's wrong. My son and his wife haven't been away for nothing in 3 years. And the offer of help from Vivian? That's like a shark offering to help with the bleeding. There's no need, I reply. I've got it covered. Platt comes once a week to help with the heavy lifting. Platt? The guy from the farm next door? Dad, he's in his 60s. Ekar, 59, and he's in better shape than you are, son. I can't help but quip. Last time you were here, you were out of breath coming up the porch. Look, Hugo's voice turned serious. Vivian and I are worried about you, living alone, away from the city. What if something happens? The same thing that's been happening for the last 10 years. I can handle myself. You're 67, Dad. Maybe it's time to think about another place to live? That's it. I'm gripping the phone tighter. What kind of other place, Hugo? Well, there are these wonderful senior communities in Greenwood, with on-site medical care, activities, a community. Nursing homes, I say in a flat voice. You want to send me to a nursing home? It's not a nursing home, Dad. It's an active retirement community. Whatever you want to call it. The answer is no. I'm going to die on this ranch, Hugo, and hopefully that's going to be a long time from now. There is a long pause, then Hugo sighs. All right, Dad, whatever you say. But we'll still stop by on Saturday, okay? Vivian will bake that apple pie you like. I hum. I've never liked Vivian's pie. Too much cinnamon and too few apples. But I don't argue. Okay, I'll expect you for lunch. After the call, I sit looking at the phone with suspicion. Something is definitely wrong. Hugo and Vivian haven't been to the ranch in over a year, and now they suddenly decide to visit the old man with the pie? And this nursing home talk. My son brought it up for a reason. I finish my coffee and walk inside the house. The old wooden floor creaks under my feet, a sound I've grown to love over the years. The house was built in 1910, and although I did renovations when I bought it, I've kept the character of the structure. Wide plank floors, ceiling beams, stone fireplace in the living room. The kitchen is modernized, as are the bathrooms, but otherwise the house remains true to its age, as I am to mine. On the walls hang photographs, the story of my life in pictures. A young Theodore Barlow and his wife Elaine at the opening of Barlow Construction's first office. Hugo on graduation day at the university. Our family in front of the new house I built for us when the business started to flourish. Hugo and Vivian on their wedding day. Me standing next to my son, smiling but eyes wary. I've never trusted Vivian. Too calculating, too ambitious. Elaine said I was just jealous of my son's daughter-in-law. But I know people. In 30 years in the construction business, I've learned to recognize those who see you only as an opportunity for profit. Vivian was one of those people. I pause in front of a photograph taken 5 years ago. I'm handing Hugo a symbolic key to the company. Back then, I sold him 60% of the shares, keeping 40 for myself as a safety cushion. It was a generous deal. I could have gotten twice as much by selling to an outside buyer. But I wanted the business to stay in the family. Hugo got a controlling interest. I got a decent amount of money in the account and the right to an annual dividend. Things went well for the first 2 years. Then the problems started. Hugo started making risky decisions, taking on questionable projects. I tried to talk to him, but he waved me off. Times change, old man. You have to adapt. Gradually, the dividends began to decrease. When I inquired about the reason, Hugo explained it as temporary difficulties and reinvestment in development. I wasn't sure if this was true, but what could I do? The company now belonged to him. I pick up the photograph and look closely at my son's face. What had changed since then? When did he go from an ambitious young man with burning eyes to someone who wants to send his own father to a nursing home? Vivian. The answer has always been the same. Vivian. I return the photograph to its place and walk to my office. Here in the old oak secretary is where all the important documents are kept. The insurance, the will, the ranch papers, the remaining company stock. I check the drawer. Everything is in place, but something seems off. It's always seemed silly to me, but I have a habit of putting documents in a certain order, and now that order has been disrupted. Someone has been going through my papers. The last time Hugo and Vivian were here, I'm jogging my memory. It was Thanksgiving last year. I dozed off after dinner, and when I woke up, Hugo was watching TV, and Vivian. Where was Vivian? I don't remember seeing her. Could she have come into the office while I was asleep? I'm going through the paperwork on the ranch. Everything looks right, but the worry won't let me go. Hugo and his sudden interest in my well-being, the talk about the nursing home, the disordered paperwork. Something's not right here. I close the secretary and decide to call my old friend Willis Holt. We've known each other since high school, and he worked as a lawyer for my company until he retired 3 years ago. If anyone can give me advice, it's Willis. I dial his number, but it goes to voicemail. I leave a message asking him to call me back at his earliest convenience. Then I leave the house and head toward the stables. Work has always helped me clear my thoughts, and there's always something to do in the stable. I have 2 horses, King, a stately gelding, and Lady, a burly gray mare. I've never been much into riding, but here at the ranch, horses are more practical than I thought. Sometimes it's easier to ride to the far corner of the property than to walk or ride the ATV. I clean the stalls, change the water, put on feed. The monotonous work is soothing, but thoughts of Hugo's strange behavior keep me going. What is he up to, and why now? The answer comes when I return to the house and check the mail. Among the bills and flyers, I find a letter from the IRS. They inform me that my request for a review of the ranch's tax assessment has been received and approved. The problem is that I made no such request. I scrutinized the document. It states that I requested the reassessment due to the planned sale of the property. The new appraised value of the ranch is $10,200,000, and at the bottom is a signature that looks like mine, but it's not my signature. Someone forged my signature and requested a reappraisal of the ranch. Why? The only explanation is that someone is planning to sell my property, and I have a pretty good idea who that might be. I clutch the letter in my hand, feeling the anger rising in me. Hugo and Vivian. They're going to sell my ranch right out from under my nose. That's why the nursing home talk. That's why the sudden visits and concern for my well-being. I put the letter on the table and breathe deeply, trying to calm myself down. Not a time for emotion. It's a time for strategy. If my son and his wife are up to something, I need to be one step ahead. I built a successful business from scratch for a reason. I know how to see threats and respond to them. The phone rings again. This time it's Willis, returning my call. "Ted, you old sneak, what's up?" His voice is as cheerful as ever. Willis, I need your advice. Professional advice. I briefly explained the situation, the strange behavior of Hugo and Vivian, the disordered paperwork, the letter from the IRS. Oh, shit. Willis doesn't hesitate, despite his age. Sounds like they're planning to sell your ranch. But how? They don't have the right to do that. I don't know, but they're up to something. Maybe they're forging documents? Maybe. Look, I'll come back tomorrow and look at your papers. In the meantime, don't let them know you suspect anything. Let them think you don't know anything. I agree. And we end the conversation. Hanging up the phone, I look out the window at my ranch. The green hills, the old oak trees, the stable, the pasture. It's all mine. I earned it with my labor, my sweat and blood. And I won't let anyone, not even my own son, take it from me. For the first time in a long time, I feel that old Theodore Barlow in me. The tough, determined businessman who never backed down and never let anyone stand in his way. Hugo made a big mistake in thinking he could outsmart me. A very big mistake. Saturday morning was surprisingly cool for late April. I woke up early, as I usually did. Years of working on construction sites had accustomed me to getting up at first light. Hugo and Vivian were due to arrive for lunch, and I had plenty of time to prepare for their visit. Not just for lunch, but for their possible machinations. After yesterday's letter from the IRS, I was certain. They were plotting something against me and my ranch. I don't know exactly how they planned to pull off this scam, but I wasn't going to sit idly by. I brewed myself a strong cup of coffee and stepped out onto the veranda. The morning fog had not yet cleared, giving the landscape a ghostly look. Somewhere in the distance, Lady rumbled, sensing my presence. That sound always lifted my spirits. Strange how quickly I'd grown attached to this place and everything connected to it. My phone vibrated. A message from Willis. Be at your place by 9. Have coffee and details ready. I smiled. Willis had never changed. Straightforward, reliable, and always punctual. We've been friends since high school, and he was the first lawyer I hired when my business started to grow, a man I trust like myself. At exactly 9 o'clock, I heard the sound of a car pulling up. Willis's old Ford pulled up in front of the house, raising a cloud of dust. My friend got out of the car, fixed his glasses, and waved at me. You look lousy, Ted, was his usual greeting, even when I looked good. And you look like you've already been buried, I replied, shaking his hand. Willis laughed, and we walked into the house. He went straight to the kitchen and poured himself some coffee from the coffee pot. So, he said, sitting down at the table. Tell me everything in order. I laid out the letter from the IRS in front of him and told him about Hugo and Vivian's strange behavior, the disordered paperwork, and the sudden concern for my well-being. Willis listened intently, taking an occasional sip of coffee and frowning. When I finished, he was silent for a while, studying the letter. This is serious, Ted, he finally said. It seems that someone is really preparing the ground for the sale of your ranch. But how? They don't have that kind of authority. Unless they're forging documents, I suggested. But even so, how could they get the money? Any bank will verify the seller's identity. Not necessarily, Willis shook his head. If they have a power of attorney from you, they can act on your behalf. But they don't. Are you sure? Willis stared at me. Have you ever signed a power of attorney for Hugo or Vivian? Maybe for the company, I wondered. When I handed over control of the company to Hugo, there were a lot of documents to sign. I had read them all, of course, or so I thought. Hell, I'm not sure, I admitted. There was a lot of legal nonsense in there. Let's go through all your paperwork, Willis suggested, and look at the deeds to the ranch. Maybe there's some loophole they're trying to exploit. We moved into my office. I opened the secretary and pulled out all the file folders. We spent the next hour going through every paper, every contract, every page of fine print. Here, Willis said, picking up one of the documents, this is the standard power of attorney you gave Hugo to handle the company's affairs. But look, he pointed to a paragraph in the middle of the page. It says the power to manage and dispose of any property belonging to the principal. That's broad enough to be construed as the power to sell your ranch. I felt the blood rush to my face with anger. I had never given him that right. Technically, by signing that document, you did. Willis looked concerned. But it's a moot point. Any good lawyer could challenge that interpretation in court. The power of attorney was given in the context of running the company, not personal property. So they can't sell the ranch? They can if they find a buyer who doesn't scrutinize the documents too closely, or if they convince the registrar that they have the right to do so. Then, of course, you could sue and probably win, but by then the money might be gone, and the new owner would insist on his rights. I cursed. Willis was right. By the time I could prove my rights in court, it might be too late. What should I do? I asked. First, let's check the deeds to the ranch. I want to make sure everything is in order. We went over the deeds to the property. Everything looked right, but Willis noticed one detail. There's no updated certificate of title. You're supposed to get it after the final mortgage payment. I paid off the mortgage 3 years ago, I said. The bank should have sent the certificate. They may have sent it, but it's not here. Willis kept going through the papers. Without that certificate, there's legal uncertainty. If Hugo has power of attorney and claims the certificate is lost, he can request a duplicate and use it to sell. I groaned. How could this have happened? I had always been pedantic about documents. Had I missed something so important? Hugo and Vivian will be here in a couple hours, I said. What should I do? Don't show that you suspect anything, Willis advised. Watch them. Listen to what they say. Maybe they'll tell you what they're up to. In the meantime, I'll make some calls, see if there's been any action on the sale of the ranch. Willis went out on the porch to make the calls, and I stayed in the office, feeling anger rising inside me. My own son and his wife are planning to steal my house from me. How did it come to this? When did the relationship with Hugo get so bad? I remembered the moment when I first noticed a change in him. It was shortly after his marriage to Vivian. Hugo used to be hardworking, respectful, though a bit stubborn. He learned from me, valued my experience. But after the wedding, he became distant. My advice became outdated, my methods old-fashioned. Vivian was always standing behind him, whispering that it was time to do things his way. When I gave him control of the company, I thought the responsibility would make him more mature. Instead, he became even more arrogant. He started taking risky projects, ignoring proven contractors in favor of cheaper ones. The quality of work went down, and the company's reputation suffered. I tried to talk to him, but he just waved me off. It's my company now, Dad. I'll run it the way I see fit. His company. Like I'd just given him 30 years of my life instead of selling it to him at a fair price. Willis returned, interrupting my gloomy thoughts. I have some bad news, Ted, he said, sitting down next to me. I talked to a friend of mine at the registry office. According to him, a bid has been filed to sell the ranch. The preliminary contract has already been drawn up. I felt my heart skip a beat. Who's the buyer? Minus Sunset Development. They plan to subdivide the land into lots and build a cottage community here. I swore. Sunset Development was known for buying up scenic lots, cutting down trees and building model homes and selling them at inflated prices. And now they're targeting my ranch. How much are they offering? I asked, even though price was the last thing on my mind. 10 million, apparently based on the new tax assessment. I wondered. 10 million was a good price, twice what I'd paid. But it wasn't about the money. This ranch was my home, my sanctuary. I wasn't going to sell it, especially not to a company that would turn it into another faceless suburb. What am I going to do, Willis? He took off his glasses and wiped them clean, something he always did when he was thinking seriously. We have a couple of options. We can petition the court to invalidate the power of attorney regarding the sale of personal property. We can file a fraud report with the police. Or we could outsmart them, Ted. Willis smiled, and I could see the same gleam in his eyes that I'd seen in his youth when we'd come up with a gamble. We could set up a trust and put the ranch into that trust. You would be the beneficiary, but technically the trust would own the property. No power of attorney will allow Hugo to sell what you don't own. Is that legal? Absolutely. People create trusts all the time to protect their assets. It's standard estate planning practice. I thought about his proposal. It sounded reasonable, but there was still one question. What about the preliminary contract with Sunset? Aren't we too late? A preliminary contract is not valid unless it is confirmed by a final purchase agreement. We have time, but we have to move quickly. I can have the trust documents ready by tomorrow. We'll file them first thing Monday morning. I was relieved. We had a plan. Thank you, Willis. I knew I could count on you. Don't thank me prematurely. He grew serious. You still have to survive the meeting with Hugo and Vivian. Remember, don't show that you know anything. Let them think their plan is working. I nodded. Willis was right. I had to play the part of the unsuspecting old man. I can handle it, I assured him. It wouldn't be the first time I'd had to deal with dishonest people. Willis left around 11, promising to return tomorrow with the trust documents. I was left alone, preparing for my son and daughter-in-law's visit. I decided to make dinner. Nothing fancy, just grilled steaks, potatoes, and salad. Normal food for a normal family dinner. It was like everything was fine. At 12:30, I heard the sound of a car pulling up. Hugo's new Mercedes pulled up in front of the house. I watched from the kitchen window as they got out of the car. Hugo dressed in an expensive casual suit and Vivian in an elegant dress. Totally inappropriate for a visit to the ranch. In her hands was a box, apparently the promised apple pie. I took a deep breath, reminding myself to play the part. Then I stepped out onto the porch, smiling like I was glad to see them. Hugo, Vivian, it's so good to see you. Hugo came up the steps and hugged me. The hug was awkward, like he was hugging a stranger instead of his father. Hi, Daddy. You look good. For your age, you mean? I couldn't resist a stiletto. That's not what I meant, he frowned. Vivian followed, giving me her trademark cold smile. Theodore, I brought a pie. The one you like. Thank you, Vivian. I forced myself to smile back. Come inside. Dinner's almost ready. We went inside. I noticed Vivian's gaze sliding over the living room, assessing the furniture, the paintings, everything that could be sold. Or is it my paranoia? It's a beautiful place, Dad, Hugo said, looking around. You take good care of it. I try, I replied. Though, of course, it gets harder as I get older. I deliberately played along with their narrative about the helpless old man, watching their reactions. Hugo and Vivian exchanged quick glances. That's what we wanted to talk about, Hugo began. We're worried about you, Papa. Living alone in such a big house, keeping an eye on everything. I'm doing fine, I interrupted him, pretending I didn't know what he was getting at. Platt helps with the hard work, and I do the rest. Keeps me in shape. But what if you fall down or get sick? Vivian intervened. There's no one around to help. I have a cell phone, I patted my pocket, and I'm not so ancient that I can't dial 911. Hugo looked disappointed at my stubbornness. Dad, we just want you to be safe. These senior communities I mentioned, they're designed specifically for active people like you. There's tennis courts, a pool, a library, daily activities, shunush son, and nurses to make sure I'm not dead. I finished for him. No, thank you. I'll stay here. But the ranch requires so much work, Hugo continued, and the maintenance costs. I can afford it, I cut him off. Let's have lunch. The steaks are getting cold. I headed out to the backyard where a table was already set up and the grill was smoking. Hugo and Vivian glanced at me but followed. Lunch passed in a tense atmosphere. We talked about the weather, the health of mutual acquaintances, and the new menu at the restaurant we all loved. Not a word about the company or my ranch. I noticed Hugo and Vivian exchanging glances when they thought I couldn't see. They were clearly frustrated by my reluctance to discuss the move. After dinner, Vivian volunteered to do the dishes, which was completely out of character. I guessed it was just an excuse to stay in the kitchen, while Hugo distracted me with conversation. She was probably planning to check my ID again or something. I decided to stay out of her way, let her think their plan was working. Hugo suggested we walk around the ranch, just like old times. I agreed and we headed toward the stables. On the way, he continued to talk about the benefits of living in a senior community, and I pretended to listen, occasionally nodding or humming. What will you do with the ranch if you do decide to move? He asked casually as we approached the stables. I don't know, I shrugged, trying to look nonchalant. Maybe I'll rent it out, or sell it if there's a good buyer. Sell it? Hugo couldn't hide his sudden interest. Have you thought about it? Sometimes I lied. It's a big responsibility and maybe someday it will be too much for me. But for now I can handle it. If you decide to sell, I could help you find a buyer. Hugo offered a little too quickly. I have connections in real estate. You could get a good price. I'm sure I could, I smiled, thinking about the price they'd already negotiated with Sunset Development. but it's not in my plans for now. Hugo looked disappointed, but quickly hid it. We spent another half an hour looking around the ranch and walked back to the house. Vivian was already waiting for us on the veranda, sipping tea. I noticed that she looked pleased and wondered what she had time to do while we were gone. Soon they were getting ready to leave, citing some plans for the evening. I didn't mind. Their visit had tired me out more than a full day's work on the ranch. "We'll talk about moving again, Dad," Hugo said, hugging me goodbye. "Think about it, okay?" "I will," I smiled, knowing I would never leave this place willingly. After they left, I thoroughly checked the entire house, especially the study. Just as I suspected, someone was going through my papers again. Several documents were out of place, and one, a copy of the ranch purchase agreement, had disappeared altogether. Apparently, Vivian had decided she could use it. I called Willis and told him about the visit and the missing document. "It confirms our suspicions," he said. "They really are planning to sell your ranch. I'm almost finished with the trust documents. I'll bring them to you tomorrow for your signature, and we'll file them at the registry office Monday morning." "Thank you, Willis. I don't know what I'd do without you." "Same thing I always do, Ted. Kick their asses, but maybe in a less legally clean way," he laughed. After the conversation, I went out on the porch and took a long look at my ranch, lit by the rays of the setting sun. I won't let anyone take it away from me, especially not my own son. If he wants a war, he'll have it. Theodore Barlow never backed down in the face of adversity, and I wasn't about to start now, at 67. Tomorrow, Willis and I would set up a trust and protect my ranch from their machinations. And then I'll decide what to do about the traitors in my family. Early Monday morning greeted me with overcast skies and drizzling rain. The weather matched my mood perfectly. Willis had arrived yesterday with the paperwork for the trust, and we had spent several hours filling out the paperwork, signing and notarizing it with an acquaintance of Willis who had agreed to come down on Sunday, especially for us. Everything was now ready to be filed at the registry office, which Willis was going to do this morning. I felt more confident knowing we had a plan of action, but the situation was still gnawing at me from the inside out. My own son was planning to steal my house. How had it come to this? At what point had I lost Hugo enough that he could plot such a thing? My musings were interrupted by the ringing of the phone, an unfamiliar number. "Theodore Barlow speaking," I answered, frowning. "Mr. Barlow, good morning," came a cheerful female voice. "This is Cassandra Parker from Elite Realty. I'm calling about your ranch." I tensed, gripping the phone tighter. "My ranch? What about it?" "Well, actually, congratulations on your successful sale." She sounded like she was announcing a lottery win. "I just got confirmation from Sunset Development that the deal is closed. They are very pleased with the acquisition and plan to begin a development on the project as early as next month." The blood froze in my veins. I knew they were planning something like this, but to hear that the deal had already closed, it was like a kick in the butt. "I'm afraid there has been a mistake." My voice sounded hoarse. "I didn't sell my ranch." There was an awkward pause. But I have the paperwork." She hesitated. "Are you Theodore Barlow, owner of the Barlow Ranch at 27 Ridgewood Road?" "Yes, that's me and my ranch. And I repeat, I did not sell it. But, She sounded confused. "I have a signed purchase agreement. The deal closed on Friday. Your representative, Hugo Barlow, acted under a power of attorney." What the hell kind of power of attorney? I was practically screaming. "I never gave my son the authority to sell my ranch." "Mr. Barlow, please calm down." Her voice became careful. "I'm just doing my job. If there's any problem with the power of attorney, you should see a lawyer. But I should warn you that the money has already been transferred and the title has been transferred to Sunset Development." I took a deep breath, trying to pull myself together. There was no point in yelling at the realtor. She was really just a middleman. "I apologize for being abrupt," I said, more reserved. "When do the new owners plan to take possession?" "The contract gives you 2 weeks to move out," she replied, clearly relieved by my calmer tone. "After that, Sunset will come to inspect the property and begin preparations." 2 weeks. I had 2 weeks to solve this nightmare. "Thanks for the information," I said. "I will contact my lawyer immediately." As soon as I finished talking, I immediately dialed Willis's number. It was busy. With a sneer, I decided not to wait and called Hugo. The anger was rumbling inside me, demanding a way out. The call went to voicemail. I left a short message. Hugo, it's Dad. I know what you did. I expect you and Vivian at my place in an hour. If you don't show up, my next call will be to the police. Then I called Vivian. She answered after the third ring. Theodore? Her voice sounded wary. Vivian, I tried to speak calmly, though I was seething inside. I just heard about the sale of my ranch. I wonder what you can tell me about it. A long pause. It was Hugo's idea, she said at last, and I almost laughed at this predictable attempt to shift the blame. He said he had power of attorney and that it would be best for everyone. You get the money, we get the commission. You sold my house without my knowledge or consent, I interrupted her. It's called fraud, Vivian, and I guarantee that if you and Hugo aren't at my place in an hour, I will file a report with the police and the district attorney's office. You won't do that, her voice trembled. It would destroy Hugo and the company. You have 59 minutes to come and explain yourself, I said and hung up. I spent the next hour pacing the living room, trying to call Willis and holding back the urge to break something. How could they? How could my own son do such a thing? Was it for the money? Or was it something more? Revenge for my not fully stepping aside? For criticizing his management decisions? Finally, after an hour and 10 minutes, I heard the sound of a car pulling up. Looking out the window, I saw Hugo's Mercedes. They had arrived with Vivian. I met them on the porch, arms crossed over my chest and not trying to hide my anger. Come in, I said coldly. We have a lot to talk about. They walked past me into the house without making eye contact. Hugo looked tense. Vivian looked scared. Good. Let them be afraid. In the living room, I pointed them to the couch, but I remained standing, towering over them. So, I began, looking directly at Hugo. You sold my ranch. Hugo squirmed, but met my gaze. I had power of attorney, he said. It was legal. A power of attorney to run the company, not to sell my personal property, I parried. And we both know it. There's no such restriction, Hugo countered. I consulted a lawyer. The wording allows me to act on your behalf on any property. And that justifies selling my house without my knowledge? I felt the anger rising in me again. The place where I plan to spend the rest of my life? You're 67, Dad, Hugo said as if he were explaining something to a child. You can't live here forever. Sooner or later, you'd have to move. We just expedited the process. And we made good money, I looked at Vivian, who was sitting with her head down. How much did you get? $1 million? 2? It's not about the money, Hugo started, but I interrupted him. Don't lie to me, I raised my voice. It's always about the money. How much? Hugo sighed. $1.5 million commission from Sunset. I whistled. That's not bad. And how much of the $10 million for the ranch is due to me? They looked at each other. Hugo coughed. We thought, given the circumstances, $4 million would be fair. 4 out of 10, I shook my head. You call that fair? And the other $6 million? The company needs investment, Hugo said quickly. The last few projects weren't as profitable as we'd hoped. With this money, we can get the company back on track. Oh, so you ruined the company I'd been building for 30 years, and now you've decided to fix things by selling my house? I felt something inside me break, the last thread that connected me to my son. You know, Hugo, I always thought you had some principles, that I raised you better than that. But you're just a thief. Don't you dare say that. Vivian jumped to her feet. Hugo is doing everything he can to save the business you handed him in a terrible state. You've always been a greedy, controlling old man who couldn't let go of the reins. And now that Hugo needs help, you refuse to help your own son. I stared at her in amazement. What kind of twisted world was she living in? I sold him a controlling interest at half the market price, I said quietly. I stayed on as a consultant without pay for 2 more years, helping with the transition. I introduced him to all my contacts, handed him all the connections. The company thrived when I handed it over. And now you're telling me it's on the verge of bankruptcy? Hugo blushed but remained silent. Well, I continued, perhaps you do need the money, but not at the expense of my house. I'm suing Hugo. And the police. You can't, Vivian exclaimed. It would destroy the company's reputation. I don't care about the company's reputation, I said. You stole my house. Hugo got up from the couch. His eyes were a mixture of anger and despair. Don't do this, Dad. Think of the consequences. The scandal, the lawsuits. It could take years. You're 67. Do you really want to spend the rest of your life in litigation? If I have to, I do. I didn't back down. This is my home, Hugo. I'm not giving it up without a fight. He stepped forward, his face contorted with anger. 4 million, Papa. More than enough for a man your age. You could buy an apartment in the city or move into that senior community I told you about. You'll be fine there. I'm fine here. I didn't move. And I'm not going anywhere. You'll have to. Hugo's voice became hard. The contract's signed. The money's been transferred. You have 2 weeks to move out. After that, Sunset has the right to call the sheriff for eviction. Then so be it. I crossed my arms over my chest. Let the sheriff come and get me out of here. I can imagine how it'll look on the news. Successful businessman evicts his own father from his home. Great PR for the company, isn't it? Hugo and Vivian looked at each other again. I could see them frantically going through their options. Look, Dad, Hugo tried to soften his tone. Let's be reasonable. 4 million is good money. You can start a new life without having to worry about maintaining this huge ranch. Think of it as an opportunity, not a loss. I laughed, bitter and mirthless. Opportunity? You stole my house and you call that an opportunity? I shook my head. Get out of here. Both of you. The next time I see you will be in court. Dad, please. Hugo started, but I interrupted him. Get out of my house. They reluctantly got up and headed for the door. On the threshold, Hugo turned around. I'm transferring 4 million to you today. Think carefully before you do something irreparable. After they left, I sank into the chair, feeling devastated. My own son betrayed me for money? How had it come to this? Where had I gone wrong in raising him? I tried Willis again, and this time he answered. Ted, I was just about to call you, he said. We have a problem. The registry office refused to accept our trust documents. They said the title to the ranch had already been transferred to Sunset Development on Friday. But how? I was stunned. We had checked everything. They used the expedited registration process, Willis explained. They paid extra for the rush. I'm afraid they're ahead of us. I sat there stunned by the news. All our plans had fallen apart. My house was officially sold. I had 2 weeks to move out. What could we do? I asked, feeling hope leaving me. We have several options. Willis didn't give up. We can file a lawsuit to invalidate the transaction on the grounds that the power of attorney had been exceeded. We could file a fraud charge with the DA's office. But I have to warn you, Ted, it's going to be a long process and expensive. I don't care, I said. I'm ready to fight. I knew you'd say that. I could hear the smile in Willis's voice. I've already started preparing the documents. I'll meet you tomorrow and discuss strategy. After talking to Willis, I went out on the veranda and looked at my ranch for a long time. My home, my sanctuary. I couldn't believe I could lose it. My phone vibrated, alerting me to an incoming message. A bank notification of incoming funds. $4 million from Hugo Barlow. Followed by a message from Hugo himself. This is your share. Now get out of my life, you miserable old man. I read the message several times, unable to believe my eyes. Pathetic old man? Is that what my son thinks of me? After everything I've done for him? The phone rang. Hugo's number. I answered it, but I didn't say anything. Did you get the money? His voice sounded cold. I did. And your message too. I tried to speak calmly. Then we're done. 4 million is more than generous. You could buy yourself an apartment anywhere and live comfortably for the rest of your life. Think of it as an early inheritance. Inheritance? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You stole my house, Hugo. That's not inheritance, that's robbery. Call it what you want. His voice grew harsher. The fact is, the ranch is sold, the money's transferred, and you have 2 weeks to move out. If you want to spend the rest of your years in litigation, that's your business. But I don't recommend it. You'll only waste time and money. Why, Hugo? I really wanted to understand. Why did you do it? Because you never let go, he said, a lingering resentment in his voice. Never let me really control the company, always hovering over me, criticizing me, telling me what I was doing wrong. This business was supposed to be mine, but you were always there, a shadow of the founding father who could never be pleased. I was trying to help, I said quietly, to pass on the experience. You were trying to control, Hugo cut me off. Always. And when I finally got control, you couldn't stand the fact that I was doing things my way and drove the company to the brink of bankruptcy, I said. These are temporary difficulties, he was almost shouting. With the money from the sale of the ranch, I'll fix everything, and the company will thrive. My way, not your way. Good luck, I said, holding back my anger. But you know, Hugo, I'm not going down without a fight. This is my home, and I will fight for it in any way I can. Fight all you want, old man, his voice became mocking. It's your share. Now get out of my life. The deal is closed, and nothing can undo it. And then I laughed, loudly, sincerely, heartily, because that's when I remembered something I hadn't even told Willis. What I'd done the week before, when I'd first suspected that Hugo and Vivian were up to something. What's so funny? Hugo sounded confused. You're so sure you won, I said, still chuckling. So sure you outsmarted the old man? What are you talking about? You'll see, I smiled into the phone, feeling the weight on my heart begin to recede. You'll see very soon. I hung up the phone, still smiling. Did Hugo and Vivian really think they could just take my house away from me? That I wouldn't take measures to protect it? They'd forgotten who they were dealing with. I built a successful business from the ground up for a reason. I've always been able to anticipate and prepare for risks. And this time, I was prepared too. They didn't even realize that a few days ago, I had already planned everything. I sat on the veranda, watching the sunset and sipping whiskey. A rare weakness for me, but today was a special day. A day when I remembered how I had outplayed my own son at his own game. It all started 3 weeks ago. I noticed the first signs of trouble after Hugo and Vivian's Thanksgiving visit. I'd fallen asleep after dinner, an old habit I wasn't about to give up, despite my son's teasing. When I woke up, I found that Vivian wasn't in the living room. Hugo had said she'd gone for a walk, but something in his voice made me wary. After they left, I checked my office and noticed that some of the papers weren't laid out the way I'd left them. A small thing that most people wouldn't notice, but I've always been pedantic about my papers. Someone was clearly going through my papers, and that someone could only be Vivian. At the time, I brushed off suspicion, figuring she was just curious. But a week after that, I received a strange call from my bank. They wanted to confirm that I had requested my account statement and a copy of the mortgage on the ranch. I had made no such request. The bank teller said the request was made over the phone by a person who identified himself as me and provided all the necessary identification, including my social security number and my mother's maiden name, information that Hugo knew. It was then that I realized something was wrong. My son and his wife were collecting information about me and my assets. Why? The answer was obvious. They were planning some kind of financial operation involving my assets. And the only thing I had of value was the ranch. The next day I called not Willis, but another lawyer I knew, Nathaniel Brown. We weren't close friends, which was important. I didn't want anyone in my inner circle to know about my suspicions. Nathaniel specialized in asset protection and tax planning, and his office was not in Piedmont, but in a neighboring city, which reduced the chances of a chance meeting with someone I knew by chance. I remember our conversation as clearly as if it were yesterday. Mr. Barlow, Nathaniel adjusted his glasses as he studied the deeds to my ranch. If you're concerned that someone might try to take over your property, we have several options to protect you. I'm listening, I said, leaning back in my chair. The surest way is to set up an irrevocable trust. You transfer the ranch to the trust, but you remain the beneficiary, that is, you continue to use it and receive income, if any. But the property will technically belong to the trust, not to you personally. And that would protect the ranch from being sold without my consent? Absolutely. Even if someone has a power of attorney from you, it won't apply to the trust property. No one can sell the ranch without the trustee's consent. Who's the trustee? Usually a trustee, someone you have complete confidence in, or a professional trustee, or a financial institution. It got me thinking, who could I trust with such a responsibility? Willis was the obvious choice, but I wanted to keep it a secret even from him. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I knew. The fewer people who knew about my plans, the less chance Hugo would find out about them. Could I be a trustee myself? Technically, yes, but it reduces the protection. If you are both donor and trustee, the court may decide that the trust is just your alter ego and ignore it. It's better to appoint someone else. In the end, we decided that Nathaniel himself would be the trustee. I trusted him as a professional, and his law firm was reputable enough to ensure that the trust was secure. We spent several days preparing the documents. I transferred the ranch into an irrevocable trust with a life estate. Technically, I no longer own the ranch, but I had every right to live there for the rest of my life. No one, even with the strongest power of attorney, could sell it without Nathaniel's consent as trustee. To further protect our position, we included a clause in the trust agreement prohibiting any transaction involving the property without the written notarized consent of the beneficiary, me. It was a double layer of protection. The most difficult part was registering the transfer of ownership. We had to file the paperwork at the registry office, which meant that the information would become public. Hugo could have found out if he checked the registry, but Nathaniel offered a solution. "We'll file the paperwork at the last minute," he said, "literally the day before they're needed. If your son is really planning something, he's probably already set the stage. But he can't close the deal if you don't own the ranch anymore." That's exactly what we did. Nathaniel prepared all the documents and we signed them in his office in front of a notary public. The trust was officially created, but the transfer of ownership had not yet been registered. The documents were waiting to be filed in Nathaniel's safe. I assumed we had time, but I was wrong. Events moved faster than I expected. The call from Hugo talking about the nursing home, the strange behavior during their visit, the missing documents, everything indicated that they were accelerating their plans. When I got the letter from the IRS about the reassessment of the ranch, I knew the time was right. I called Nathaniel. "They're acting on it," I said. "We need to register the trust immediately." "It's Friday and it's late," he replied. "The registry closes in an hour, but I can file the documents on Monday morning as soon as they open." "Okay," I agreed, not knowing that I was already late. Monday morning, when I received a call from the realtor informing me that my ranch had sold, I was shocked. How had Hugo managed to act so quickly? Nathaniel called an hour later with the bad news. Hugo had filed the sale paperwork on Friday afternoon using an expedited process. He paid an additional fee for the expedited filing, and the transaction was finalized by Friday evening. Our trust documents were rejected because the ranch was already officially owned by Sunset Development. I was shattered. All of my plans, all of my preparation, it was all for nothing. Hugo was one day ahead of me, but Nathaniel wouldn't give up. "We still have a trump card up our sleeve," he said. "We can challenge the deal on the grounds that it was fraudulent." "What are the odds?" I asked. "Honestly, 50-50. The power of attorney does give Hugo broad powers, but we can prove that it was intended to run the company, not to sell your personal assets." I decided to fight it. We prepared a lawsuit to invalidate the transaction. But before filing it, I decided to take one more step. I contacted Sunset Development directly. Their office was located in downtown Piedmont, in a glass building that always struck me as overly pretentious. I walked in without an appointment and demanded to see the CEO. Mr. Barlow, Clayton Whitney, the head of Sunset Development, looked surprised when I entered his office. "To what do I owe this visit?" "You bought my ranch," I said without preamble. "No, but I didn't sell it." Whitney frowned. "As far as I know, the deal was legitimate. Your son was acting on your behalf under a power of attorney." "A power of attorney that didn't authorize him to sell my personal property." I placed the folder of documents Nathaniel had prepared on the table. "This is a copy of the lawsuit I'm filing in court tomorrow. I'm seeking a declaration of nullity on the grounds of fraud." Whitney opened the folder and took a quick look at the documents. His face grew more and more serious. "These are serious allegations, Mr. Barlow, and they are supported by evidence." I pointed to specific items in the documents. "The power of attorney was granted in the context of running the company. My son never had the authority to sell my ranch. It's fraud, pure and simple." Whitney leaned back in his chair, contemplating the situation. "What do you suggest?" "Call off the deal. Give me my ranch back. I'll give you back the full amount, 10 million. And if we refuse, then there'll be a trial. A public, messy trial. Imagine the headlines. Famous construction company sells founder's home without his consent. Sunset Development engages in shady deal with crooks. I doubt it will do your reputation or sales any good. Whitney was silent, weighing his options. Finally, he sighed. Dash, I need to discuss this with our lawyers and board of directors. Give me 24 hours. I nodded and stood up. 24 hours. After that, I'm filing a lawsuit. Exactly 24 hours later, Whitney called me himself. We've agreed to rescind the deal, he said without preamble. But there's a problem. We've already transferred the money to your son's account. That's not my problem, I replied. Claim it back from him. We've already contacted him. He claims that most of the money has already been spent or transferred to other accounts. I wasn't surprised. Knowing Hugo and especially Vivian, I could imagine how quickly they started spending unexpected wealth. And again, it's not my problem. I'm willing to pay back the 4 million that Hugo transferred to me. The other 6 is between you and him. The bottom line is, we agreed that I would return the 4 million I received 4 million, and Sunset takes the remaining 6 million from Hugo. The ranch reverts back to me, and the deal is null and void from the start. When I walked out of Whitney's office with a freshly signed termination agreement, I felt like a winner. My plan had worked, not in the way I had expected, but the result was the same. I had kept my ranch. The next step was to inform Hugo of the development. I decided not to call him, but to drive to the company office. I wanted to see his face when he found out his plan had failed. The Barlow construction office was in the same building that I had used 30 years ago when I first started the business. I had built that building with my own hands, put my heart and soul into it. Even though Hugo owned the company now, I still felt a connection to the place. The receptionist recognized me and smiled. Mr. Barlow, how nice to see you. Hello, Doris, I smiled back. Is Hugo in? Yes, but he asked me not to disturb. She hesitated. He has a meeting with Mrs. Barlow and the CFO. I'm sure he'll find a moment for his father. I winked at her and, without waiting for a response, headed toward my son's office. The door was closed, but I didn't knock. I just opened it and walked in. Hugo was sitting at his desk. Vivian was in the chair across from him, and Douglas Reed, the company's CFO, was sitting next to her. All 3 of them turned to the door with a look of surprise on their faces. Dash, Dad? Hugo looked like he'd seen a ghost. What are you doing here? I came to tell you the news, I smiled, closing the door behind me. Very interesting news. I noticed Vivian tense up. She was always more perceptive than Hugo. What news? My son asked, trying to keep his composure. I just came from the Sunset Development office, I said, watching their reactions. I had a very productive meeting with Clayton Whitney. Hugo's face went pale. Why did you meet with him? To discuss the illegal sale of my ranch, of course. I walked over to the table and laid a copy of the termination agreement on it. He agreed that the deal was fraudulent, and we decided to terminate it amicably. The ranch reverts back to me. Hugo grabbed the document and began to read frantically. Vivian jumped up from her seat and peered over his shoulder, her face contorted with horror. But that's impossible, Hugo muttered. The deal was legitimate. I had a power of attorney, which did not authorize you to sell my personal property, I finished for him. It was fraud, Hugo, and Whitney chose not to get involved in a lawsuit and a scandal. But the money, Vivian began, and I saw real fear in her eyes. Yes, the money, I nodded. I'm returning the 4 million you so generously transferred to me. But the other 6 million? Whitney is very interested in its whereabouts. We haven't gotten it yet, Hugo said quickly, but I could see the lie in his eyes. Don't lie to me, my voice became hard. Whitney said the money was transferred on Friday, all 10 million, and he'd already contacted you about returning it. Hugo exchanged a glance with Vivian. There was a heavy silence in the room. We can't get it back, Hugo finally said. We've already used some of the funds. For what? I asked, though I guessed the answer. We booked a cruise. Vivian looked like she was about to cry. A trip around the world, all expense paid, non-refundable. And I bought some jewelry, and Hugo ordered a new car. And, Hugo added, looking past me, we put $2 million into the company account to cover the debts. So you spent or transferred $6 million over the weekend? I couldn't believe such recklessness. Money that didn't belong to you. We thought the deal was legitimate, Vivian exclaimed. We didn't know you could undo it. Of course we didn't, I shook my head, because you were too busy spending money to think of the consequences. Douglas Reed, who had been watching our conversation in silence until then, coughed. If I may, he said, turning to me, the company did receive a transfer of $2 million. These funds were used to pay off the most urgent debts. Repaying that amount right now would put the company in a very difficult position. I looked at the CFO. Douglas had been with the company for almost 20 years, back when I was still here. He was a competent professional and an honest man. So, how bad are things, Douglas? I asked him bluntly. He glanced at Hugo, who nodded reluctantly, authorizing me to speak. Very bad, Mr. Barlow, Douglas admitted. The last 3 projects have been unprofitable. We have outstanding loans, debts to suppliers. Without that $2 million, we probably won't last a month. I sighed. The company I'd been building for 30 years was on the verge of bankruptcy, and my son, instead of asking for help, decided to steal my house. What about the other $4 million? I asked, looking at Hugo and Vivian. The ones you spent on cruises and jewelry? We can't get them back. Vivian looked frightened. The tickets are non-refundable. The jewelry has already been delivered. The car is booked with a deposit. I understand, I nodded. Well, you'll have to explain that to Whitney and his lawyers. I'm sure they'll be very interested in the details. What did you do, Dad? Hugo's voice shook with anger and fear. Why did you do all this? I protected my home, I answered simply. The house you tried to steal from me. But now Sunset is going to sue us, Vivian exclaimed. We won't be able to get the $4 million back. They'll ruin us. Maybe, I shrugged. But that's not my problem, is it? You chose to go down that road. I turned to leave, but Hugo called out to me. Wait, you can't just walk away. You have to help us. I stopped and slowly turned to him. I have to, I asked him again. Why should I help the people who tried to steal my house, who called me a miserable old man and demanded that I disappear from their lives? Hugo had at least the conscience to look ashamed. Yeah, I didn't want to say it. I was angry. No, that's exactly what you meant to say, I interrupted him. And you know what? You're right. I'm out of your life. Solve your own problems, Hugo. That's what you wanted, isn't it? Complete independence from a miserable old man? With those words, I walked out of the office, leaving them shocked and confused. As I passed through the reception area, Doris smiled at me, but I noticed a question in her eyes. She must have heard the raised voices. It's all right, Doris, I told her. Just family stuff. Stepping outside, I took a deep breath of the fresh spring air. I felt strangely devastated, yet liberated at the same time. I had kept my home, but I had lost my son. Although, truth be told, I had lost him much earlier, I just didn't want to admit it. On the way home, I stopped by Nathaniel's office to tell him the good news and thank him for his help. He was happy that everything had been resolved without a lawsuit. What about the trust? He asked. Do you still want to set it up? Definitely, I replied. Now that the ranch is mine again, let's protect it properly. And this time, let's get it registered right away. We spent the rest of the day formalizing the paperwork and filing it at the registration office. By evening, my ranch was officially owned by the trust, and I had a lifetime right to live there. No one, even with the most convincing power of attorney, could now sell it without my express consent. Returning to the present moment, I finished my whiskey and looked out at the sunset. I had won the battle, but at what cost? My family was destroyed, perhaps irrevocably. The company I'd spent a lifetime building was on the verge of bankruptcy. And my son was now my enemy. But I didn't regret my actions. I had protected what was rightfully mine. And if Hugo and Vivian decided to turn against me, they had to be prepared for the consequences. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A message from Willis. Heard the news. Impressive. Call if you need help. I smiled. At least I still had real friends. And my home. And that was no small thing for a miserable old man. It had been almost 3 weeks since I'd canceled the deal with Sunset Development and gotten the ranch back. In that time, I hadn't spoken to Hugo or Vivian once. They flew off on their non-refundable cruise, apparently deciding that problems could be put off until later. Hugo's typical approach is to ignore difficulties in the hope that they will somehow resolve themselves. I, on the other hand, wasted no time. After my meeting with Nathaniel, I visited Willis and told him the whole story. My old friend was impressed with my foresight. "You've always been able to think ahead, Ted," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "But what now? Hugo and Vivian spent money that didn't belong to them. Sunset isn't going to let that just go." "I know," I replied, "and it gives me certain possibilities." I asked Willis to gather information on the current state of Barlow Construction. Even though I'd sold my controlling interest, I still had 40% of the company, and I was entitled to access to the financial statements. What we discovered was worse than I expected. The company was indeed on the verge of bankruptcy. The last 3 major projects had been unprofitable due to illiterate planning and the use of cheap but unreliable subcontractors. The firm's reputation had suffered, clients were leaving for competitors, debts were mounting, and new contracts were not enough to cover them. The $2 million that Hugo transferred to the company from the money from the sale of the ranch only briefly delayed the inevitable. Without a major change in management, Barlow Construction wouldn't last 6 months. This information gave me a clear idea of what to do next. I prepared a plan and waited for Hugo and Vivian to return from their cruise. Finally, early Thursday morning, I received a call from Willis. "They're back," he reported. "My friend in the police department says that Sunset representatives and lawyers came to their house last night. It was noisy." "Thanks for the information." I smiled into the phone. "I think they'll contact me soon." And indeed, not an hour later, my phone rang. Hugo's number. Dash, dash, yes, question mark, I answered dryly. Dash, dash, Dad? Hugo's voice sounded tense. "We need to talk." "I'm listening." I kept my tone neutral. "Not over the phone. Can we come to your place?" It's important." "I'm sure it's important." I couldn't resist sarcasm. "Come by for lunch. 1 o'clock. "Thank you," he exhaled with relief. "We'll be there." I spent the morning preparing for the meeting. Not physically, I wasn't going to cook lunch for them, but mentally and strategically. I knew what I wanted to accomplish, and I realized I had all the leverage to do it. Hugo and Vivian were in a desperate situation, and desperate people will do anything to save themselves. At exactly 1 o'clock, I heard the sound of a car pulling up. Looking out the window, I saw Hugo's Mercedes. They drove up together just as I expected. I met them on the porch with my arms crossed over my chest. Hugo looked haggard with dark circles under his eyes. Vivian was pale, her usually flawless makeup seeming hasty and careless. No sign of a relaxed post-cruise tan. Apparently the vacation hadn't been very pleasant with the prospect of imminent collapse upon her return. "Come in," I said, opening the door. They walked past me into the house, and I noticed Vivian looking around nervously, as if expecting to see the police or something. In the living room, I pointed them to the couch and sat down in the chair across from them. "So," I began, "you're back from your cruise. How was your vacation?" Hugo wrinkled his nose. "Dad, please don't be sarcastic. We're in serious trouble." Dash, dash, really question mark. I raised my eyebrows. "What kind of trouble?" "Sunset Development wants all the money back," Vivian blurted out. "All 10 million. They're threatening to sue if we don't pay it within a week." "And what did you say?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "We can't pay back that much." Hugo ran his hand through his hair in a gesture of despair. "The 4 million we transferred to you, you've already paid them back directly. But the other 6, 2 went to the company and the rest, we spent. On a cruise, jewelry, and a new car." I nodded. "I remember." "They say they're going to file a fraud report with the police." Vivian looked scared. "We could get arrested, Daddy." I noted that it was the first time she had called me Daddy rather than Theodore. Apparently the situation was really desperate. "You did commit fraud," I said calmly. "You misused a power of attorney, sold someone else's property without the owner's consent, and then spent the money you'd gotten illegally. These are serious charges." "We know," Hugo exclaimed. "But we didn't think. I didn't think." "That's your problem, Hugo," I interrupted him. "You never think about the consequences. Not when you take on risky projects, not when you hire unreliable contractors, not when you decide to sell my house. Hugo lowered his head without arguing. For the first time in a long time, he looked truly ashamed. What are we going to do, Dad? He asked quietly. We've come to ask for your help. I leaned back in my chair, studying them both. Vivian looked scared. Hugo looked broken. They were in my hands, and we all understood that. What exactly do you want from me? I asked. Money, Vivian said bluntly. We have to pay back the $6 million sunset or we'll go to jail. And where do you expect me to get $6 million from? I raised my eyebrows. Sell the ranch? No, Hugo answered quickly. No, of course not. But you have savings, investments. You could give us a loan that we could pay back gradually. I laughed. A loan? Do you really think that after everything that's happened, I'm going to lend you $6 million, money you'll probably never be able to pay back, given the state of the company? Please, Dad, Hugo had tears in his eyes. I know I made a terrible mistake. I shouldn't have. It was all wrong, but we're desperate. Sunset won't back down. They've already hired one of the best law firms in the state. And you think now that you're in trouble, I should come to your rescue? After you called me a pathetic old man and demanded that I disappear from your life? Hugo flinched as if struck by a blow. I didn't mean that. I was angry, upset. No, that's exactly what you meant. I stepped forward. You saw me as a nuisance, a burden, a man whose time had passed. And you know what? Maybe you're right. My time in business has indeed passed. But unlike you, I've never used unfair methods to get what I want. There was a heavy silence in the room. Vivian was the first to break it. What do we do? She asked, and there was real desperation in her voice. We sold everything. The jewelry, got the car back. But it's a drop in the bucket. We can't raise $6 million. I stared at them both, pondering. Part of me wanted to just kick them out the door, let them deal with the consequences of their actions. They deserved it. But the other part, the more practical part, saw this situation as an opportunity. I have a proposal, I said finally, but you may not like it. They both stepped forward, looking at me expectantly. Anything, Dad, Hugo said quickly. We'll do anything you say. The company is on the verge of bankruptcy, I began. Without urgent action, it won't survive 6 months, right? Hugo nodded reluctantly. The situation is difficult, he admitted. But with the new projects, there will be no new projects, I interrupted him. Not with your current reputation. The last 3 projects have been done poorly, with delays and budget overruns. Clients are leaving, subcontractors are demanding payment in advance because of delays in billing. The company is sinking, Hugo. He lowered his head without arguing. What do you suggest? Vivian asked suspiciously. I'll pay Sunset $6 million, I said. I'll solve your legal problem, but in return you'll give me control of the company. What? Hugo looked stunned. You want to take the company? I want to save the company, I corrected him. The company I spent 30 years building and you destroyed in 5. You'll give me your 60% stake, and I'll be the sole owner. But this is all I have. Hugo looked lost. Dash. My whole life. You'll have a choice, I continued. Either you agree to my terms and I save you from jail and bankruptcy, or you refuse. And then I not only don't help you with the money, but I file a fraud report with the police, on my own behalf. You wouldn't do that, Vivian shook her head. He's your son. The son who tried to steal my house, I reminded her. The son who called me a pathetic old man and demanded that I disappear from his life. Believe me, Vivian, I'm dead serious. Hugo and Vivian glanced over, silently communicating. I could see the reality of their situation slowly coming to them. They had no choice, and they realized it. What will happen to us? Hugo finally asked. If I give you the company? That will depend on you, I answered. You can stay on under me if you want to, but not as CEO. Perhaps as a project manager or in another position that suits your skills. Or you can leave and start over somewhere else. And the compensation? Vivian intervened. 60% of the shares are worth well over $6 million, even including the company's debts. I grinned. Even in this situation, she was thinking about money. The company is on the verge of bankruptcy, Vivian, Its stock is practically worthless right now. I'm offering you freedom from prosecution and the opportunity to start over, debt-free and without a criminal record. It's a more than generous offer. Hugo sat with his head down, looking at his hands. I could see how hard it was for him to accept the thought of losing the company he thought he owned. But he really had no choice. How much time do we have to think about it? He asked quietly. Sunset has given you a week, I replied. I give you until tomorrow morning. At 9 o'clock, I expect you in Willis's office with a decision. And if we agree Vivian was still looking for loopholes, how do we know you'll keep your end of the bargain? That you'll pay Sunset? Unlike you, I keep my word, I said coldly. But if you need assurances, we can formalize everything legally. Willis will prepare the necessary documents. The transfer of the shares will take place simultaneously with the confirmation of payment to Sunset. They looked at each other again, and I could see in their eyes the realization that there was no other way out. We need to discuss this, Hugo said, rising from the couch. We'll give you an answer tomorrow. I nodded. See you tomorrow, 9 o'clock, Willis's office. As I walked them to the door, I experienced a strange feeling. Not triumph as one might expect, but rather sadness. My son, the one I'd raised, the one I'd entrusted with my life's work, was incapable of keeping it. And now I was taking the company back, not out of greed or desire for control, but to save it from ultimate collapse. As their car pulled away, I called Willis. Did they come? He asked without preamble. Yes, and everything went as we expected, I answered. Get the stock transfer papers ready. You'll have them at 9 o'clock tomorrow. Are you sure they'll agree? They have no choice, I said. Sunset won't back down, and they won't find $6 million. The company is bankrupt. Their personal assets are minuscule compared to their debt. Their only option is to accept my offer. Are you sure you want to do that, Ted? Willis's voice got serious. Taking on the company again in your condition? You're 67. You could just enjoy retirement on your ranch, I wondered. Did I really want to go back to running a troubled company at my age? Wasn't it easier to let it go bankrupt and let Hugo and Vivian face the consequences of their actions? I'm sure, I said finally. Barlow Construction is my life's work. I can't just stand by and watch it crumble. And besides, I added with a wry chuckle, what else is a miserable old man to do but work until he dies? Willis chuckled. You can do a lot of things, Ted, but pathetic is not one of them. All right, I'll have the paperwork ready by morning, and I'll contact Sunset to confirm the details of the payment. After talking to Willis, I went out on the veranda and took a long look at my ranch. The sun was slipping towards sunset, coloring the hills in golden tones. I love this place, and it was worth it. All the struggle, all the challenges. But the company was also a part of me, my legacy, and it looked like I was going to have to take on the task of rebuilding it all over again. I had no illusions. It was going to be a huge job. Reputations are easy to lose, but hard to rebuild. It would take months, perhaps years, to restore the company to its former glory, and I wasn't sure I had the time or energy to do it. But I had to try. Not for Hugo's sake, or even for my own, but for the sake of all those people who worked for the company, who depended on it, for the legacy I wanted to leave behind. The phone rang. Hugo's number. Yes, ? I answered, expecting to hear arguments or bargaining. We agree, he said simply. Tomorrow at 9 at Willis's. He hung up without waiting for a response. I stared at the phone, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. I'd gotten what I wanted, the company back under my control, and a chance to save it. But the price was a permanent break with my son. Even if Hugo decides to stay on under me, our relationship will never be the same. Well, that's the price of business, and perhaps that's the price of justice. I went back inside to prepare for tomorrow. Not only did I have to legally execute the stock transfer, but I had to plan the first steps to save the company. It was going to be a big job, and I was ready for it. Theodore Barlow was back in business. The meeting in Willis's office was quick and unemotional. Hugo and Vivian arrived at 9 o'clock sharp, just as we had agreed. Both looked as if they had been up all night. Red eyes, droopy faces. Hugo signed all the documents silently, with a stony expression on his face. Vivian stood a little apart, only occasionally glancing at me with a mixture of fear and hatred. The deal was simple. Hugo would give me all of his 60% interest in Barlow Construction, and I would agree to pay Sunset Development the $6 million they had spent from the sale of the ranch. I also pledged not to file a fraud report against them with the police. In return, they would waive any claims against the company and my ranch. When all the documents were signed, I transferred the money to the Sunset account right there in the presence of Hugo, Vivian, and Willis. Clayton Whitney sent a confirmation of receipt of the funds 10 minutes later, and that was the end of the transaction. "What now?" Hugo asked as we left Willis's office. Those were the first words he had spoken in the entire meeting. "Now I'm going back to running the company," I answered. "I'll see you in the office at 11. We need to discuss your role in the new structure." He nodded without looking at me, and he and Vivian left for their car. "Do you think he'll stay?" Willis asked, watching them drive away. "I don't know," I answered honestly, "but I have to give him a chance." At 11 o'clock, I was at the company office. My company now. Again. When I walked in, the employees looked at me with surprise and some concern. News of the change of ownership hadn't spread yet, but rumors must have already been circulating. Doris, still working at the front desk, looked confused when I walked in. "Mr. Barlow, we weren't expecting you today." "Get used to it, Doris," I smiled at her. "I'm working here again." "Is Hugo here yet?" "Yes, he's in his office." She lowered her voice. "Since this morning." "He doesn't look, not so good." I nodded and headed toward my son's office. The door was closed, and I knocked before entering, a gesture of courtesy that was more of a formality, given the circumstances. Hugo was sitting at his desk, looking out the window. He turned as I entered, and I noticed his eyes were red. Had he been crying, or just hadn't slept? "Have a seat." I pointed to the chair across from his desk, as if it were his office and not mine. He smiled weakly at the irony, but sat down in the indicated chair. "So," I began, "as I said, you can stay with the company if you want, but not as CEO. I'm thinking of the position of project manager or perhaps development director." Hugo was silent for a long time, looking somewhere past me. "I don't know if I can work here," he finally said, "after everything that's happened." "It's your choice," I shrugged. "But if you decide to stay, you should realize that I'm making all the key decisions from now on. And the first one will be a full audit of the company to see how bad it is." "It's very bad," Hugo sighed. "The last two major projects have been unprofitable. We've lost several important clients. The reputation of the company—" "I know," I interrupted him. "I've already studied the financial reports, but I want a more detailed picture. I need all the documents on current projects, all the contracts, all the agreements with subcontractors. If you stay, your first task will be to prepare a full status report for me." Hugo nodded. "Yeah, I'll think about it," he said. "Give me a few days." "Okay," I stood up. "In the meantime, I want to talk to the department heads. Tell your secretary to set up a meeting in an hour in the conference room." The next weeks were filled with intense work. I was back to where I'd started 35 years ago. 12-hour shifts every day, endless meetings, negotiations with clients and contractors. The only difference was that I had built the company from scratch then, but now I was rebuilding it from the ground up. The audit showed that the situation was even worse than I had expected. The company was not just on the verge of bankruptcy, it was already virtually bankrupt, kept afloat only by deferred payments and loans. Some of Hugo's decisions were not just bad, they were downright reckless. He took on projects without proper risk assessment, hired subcontractors who offered the lowest prices without regard for their reputation, and ignored warnings from the finance department about growing debts. To my surprise, Hugo decided to stay. He accepted the offered position of project manager and seemed sincere in trying to help rebuild the company. He worked hard for the first 2 weeks, providing me with all the information I needed, participating in negotiations with clients, and helping to establish relationships with subcontractors. But it didn't last long. Gradually, I began to notice a change in his behavior. He started coming in later, leaving earlier. The reports he prepared were inaccurate or incomplete. Several times he missed important meetings, citing ill health. The turning point came when I discovered that he had deliberately sabotaged negotiations with one of our largest potential clients. Hugo had given them incorrect estimates, inflating prices to unrealistic levels, which led to the deal falling through. When I called him to explain, he couldn't give a coherent answer. That night, I invited him to talk to me not in the office, but on neutral territory, in a small restaurant on the outskirts of the city where we had once dined together. "What's going on, Hugo?" I asked without preamble when we sat down at the table. "Why did you blow the Green Valley deal?" He was silent for a long time, fiddling with the menu. "I can't do this, Dad," he said finally. "I can't work for a company I thought was mine, but now you own it again. It's, it's humiliating." "You brought the company to this point," I reminded him, "and then you tried to steal my house to save it. I gave you a chance to stay despite that." "I know," he sighed, "and I tried, really tried, but every time I see you making decisions I would have made otherwise. Every time I see the staff turn to you instead of me, it's unbearable." I studied his face, trying to figure out what was going on in his head. Was it just wounded pride, or was it more than that? "Do you want to leave?" I asked bluntly. "Yes," he nodded. "I think it's best for everyone. For the company, for you, for me. What about Vivian? What does she think about it?" His face contorted, and I realized I'd hit a sore spot. "Vivian left," he said quietly, 2 weeks ago. Said she couldn't be with a man who'd lost everything and couldn't even provide her with the lifestyle she was used to. I wasn't surprised. Vivian had always struck me as a woman who valued material possessions above everything else, but I still felt a pang of regret for my son. "I'm sorry," I said, and it was true. "Don't be," Hugo grinned bitterly. "You always said she was with me for the money. Turns out you were right." We ate in silence for a while. The food seemed tasteless, the conversation tedious. Finally, I decided to cut to the chase. "What do you plan to do next?" I asked. "I don't know," he shrugged. "Maybe I'll leave Piedmont, start over somewhere else, where I'm not known as the loser who lost the family business." "You don't have to leave," I said. "Piedmont's a big city, and you could still work in the construction industry, just not at Barlow Construction." "Under another name, maybe," he grinned. "You're the only person I associate with Barlow around here now." I didn't argue. We finished dinner and went outside. The evening air was cool and the sky was starlit. "I'm quitting," Hugo said, looking off into the distance. "As of tomorrow, I don't want to make a scene in the office, so I'm just not coming." "Suit yourself," I nodded. "I'll do the necessary paperwork." We stood there, father and son, strangers to each other as never before. There were so many things I wanted to say, but words seemed useless, unable to bridge the gap that separated us. "Goodbye, Papa," Hugo said at last, holding out his hand. I shook it, sensing the strange formality of the gesture. "Goodbye, Hugo. Good luck." He nodded, turned, and walked to his car. I watched him until he was out of sight, and for the first time in a long time, I felt really old. The next few months were spent working nonstop to rebuild the company. I hired a new CFO, renegotiated contracts with subcontractors, and personally met with every major client to rebuild trust. The work was grueling, but gradually began to bear fruit. We completed 2 troubled projects that we inherited from Hugo's management with minimal losses. We got 2 new contracts from old clients who decided to give us another chance. The financial situation slowly but surely stabilized. By the end of the year, the company was out of the crisis. We were still far from our former prosperity, but at least we were no longer on the verge of bankruptcy. I could afford to relax a bit and cut my workday down to a more reasonable 8 to 9 hours. On one of the rare free evenings, I invited Willis to dinner at the ranch. We sat on the veranda enjoying the warm fall evening and a glass of good whiskey. "You did the impossible, Ted," Willis said, raising his glass. "Saved the company from certain doom. Congratulations." "Thank you," I smiled. "It wasn't easy, though, and sometimes I wonder if it was worth it." "What do you mean?" I wondered, staring at the sunset. "How do I explain this feeling of emptiness that sometimes enveloped me, despite all my successes? I saved the company, kept the ranch," I said at last. "But I lost my son. Hugo left Piedmont 2 months ago. I hear he's in Seattle now, working for some small construction firm. Do you keep in touch with him?" "No," I shook my head. "Sure, Malcolm. We haven't spoken since he left the company. I guess he doesn't want to see or hear from me. You can't blame yourself, Ted. Willis put his hand on my shoulder. It was Hugo who made the choice to sell your ranch without your consent. He's the one who ruined your relationship, not you. I know, I sighed. But sometimes I think I could have done things differently. Maybe not take the company away from him completely. Give him some role, some stake. And let him ruin it all again? Willis shook his head. You did the right thing, Ted. Hugo proved he wasn't capable of running the company, and what he did with the ranch. It was a betrayal. Some things can't be forgiven. I was silent as I thought about what he said. He was right, of course. What Hugo had done was unforgivable. He hadn't just made a business mistake, he'd betrayed my trust, tried to take my home, and then called me a miserable old man and demanded that I disappear from his life. And yet, he was my son, my only son, and now he was out of my life. Sometimes winning means losing everything that really matters, I said quietly. I kept the ranch, I got the company back, but I'm all alone. You have friends, Ted. Willis squeezed my shoulder lightly. And a company that needs you. That's not a small thing. It's not small, I agreed, but it wasn't what I'd dreamed of in my later years. We finished our whiskey in silence, watching the sun finally disappear over the horizon. Willis left shortly afterward, and I remained sitting on the veranda, pondering the strange twists and turns of fate. I had never planned to return to running a company at 67. I never imagined that my own son would betray me. I never imagined that I would spend my evenings alone, whiskey in hand, pondering the cost of victory and defeat. The phone rang in the house. I didn't hurry to answer it. At this hour, it could only be someone from the office with some urgent question, but it kept ringing, and I finally got up and went inside. Dash Barlow here, I said, picking up the receiver. Dash Mr. Barlow, this is Doris from the office. The receptionist's voice sounded agitated. I'm sorry to bother you so late, but we have a problem with the Oasis project. The construction manager called. He says there are some serious problems with the foundation. He wants you to come down to the site tomorrow morning. I sighed. Something always happens when you're trying to rest. Okay, Doris, tell him I'll be there at 8 in the morning, and ask him to email me pictures of the problem area right now. After the conversation, I sat down at my computer to review the photos and project documentation that had been sent. The problem was serious, but solvable. I made a few notes on possible solutions, sent instructions to the team, and only then allowed myself to go back to thinking. That was my life now. The ranch, the company, occasional meetings with friends, no family, no Hugo, just work and lonely evenings. But in a strange way, I didn't regret my decisions. Yes, I lost my son, but I kept my dignity, my home, and the company I'd spent my life building. I didn't let them take from me what was rightfully mine. Some betrayals really can't be forgiven, and some lessons must be learned no matter how bitter the cost. I stepped out onto the veranda and looked up at the starry sky. The ranch was quiet, only the wind rustling the leaves of the old oaks. This was my home, my sanctuary, and no one would ever take it from me. I was alone, but not broken, and perhaps that was the most important thing. Tomorrow would be a new day, new problems, new solutions. Life went on no matter what, and there was some truth in that, some justice. I turned and walked into the house, closing the door behind me. After all, it was necessary to get some sleep before tomorrow. Barlow Construction needed its leader, and I wasn't about to let the company or myself down. Some battles are worth fighting, even if the victory leaves a bitter taste. And this was a battle I won, no matter what.